it's best to withhold your judgment on the decisions just because you experience a negative consequence of a particular mechanism. Hello there. Today we're going to talk about mechanisms and decisions. Now, this is a complex topic I've been doodling for the last few months. So the idea here is there are decisions and there are mechanisms. In a complex system, an owner or a decision maker can only make one of 2 or 3 concrete decisions. And each one of those decisions can lead to certain mechanisms happening. And just because one mechanism leads to a bad outcome doesn't mean the initial decision is bad. Let me make much more clear with a concrete example. Let's take fat loss dieting. The conventional wisdom in fat loss dieting is you keep the amount of protein fixed. And you have 2 choices. You can do 80-20, 80% favoring the carbs, and 80-20, 80% favoring the fats. So there's the carb heavy or the fat heavy with the protein being fixed. Now, people who swear by the keto diet will claim that the fat 80%, the fat heavy diet is much, much better. And they can point to a mechanism where if you are on that diet, you are burning majority of your calories using fat. So this diet allows you to burn more calories with fat. And that is a biological mechanism that seems to justify that the fat-heavy diet is better. Now, is that really true though? In the laboratory, experiment after experiment has shown that both diets actually lead to the same result, assuming the calories stay consistent. And that in fact, there is actually a statistically non-significant favor towards the carb-heavy diet that it's slightly better. But why is that there exists a mechanism for fat-heavy diet while the statistical all studies have shown the carb-heavy diet end up losing just as much weight, if not more, statistically insignificant. And once they do more research, they found even though for the fat-heavy diet, it burns more fat, you are also consuming more fat. Whereas the other version, you're burning less fat, but you're also consuming less fat. So just because there exists a biochemical mechanism towards a positive outcome or a negative outcome doesn't make the decision itself good or bad. Now, this is really critical because almost everyone in life is the experiencer of some mechanism, and they will say, because I'm in a particular moment in time experiencing some bad benefits or bad effects of the decision, that the decision itself must be bad. That's a dangerous hole to fall into. And the crux is the observable fact that a human can see is always some particular mechanism, but the decision itself leads to a variety of mechanisms, not all of which are observable. And decisions are more like the conductor. They create a whole symphony to go off. And there are lots of mechanisms, good and bad. Whether the decision is good or bad is the sum of all the mechanisms, some of which might be theoretically happening, but they do not happen. Some of which are happening, but they are counteracted by the positive mechanisms whose benefits override the drawbacks. Why is this so important? Let's give a couple more examples. Most people will say that letting an employee go is a bad decision. Don't do that. And they point to the fact all the layoffs you have seen, people are crying, people are throwing the middle finger at the company, people are like fed up. They see all the things they are experiencing, and they see the CEO must be incompetent. The management company are corrupted. But what they did not know is there are the experience trail of a particular mechanism. It doesn't mean the decision is bad for the company. And that is really hard to swallow because most of us are going through life experiencing only aspects of the decision that were previously made a long time ago. And just because those things are good or bad doesn't mean the initial decision is not sound. The other example, which inspired this talk, is recently I have heard that my friends worked at Amazon and they take the shuttle to work and the shuttle is empty. And they point out the irony in that where Amazon, being such a frugal company, has basically empty shuttles. And so this whole return to office thing is gibberish and it doesn't work. And it points to the incompetency of the leadership team. And I point out that as the CEO of Amazon, you really have one of three choices. You can say everyone goes back to the office. That's option 1. Option 2 is nobody goes back to the office. That's option 2. And option 3 is a hybrid model. Those are the only 3 choices. Decisions have to be discrete. It cannot be just random and jumble. Oh, it depends on what you want. You can go to the office some days and some not. Like, no, it's like either you choose all, nothing, or hybrid. Hybrid is like 3 days out of 5 days and so on. So they cannot keep changing their minds as a company or as a decision owner. But the mechanisms are multitude, one of which is the apparent waste of some of the shuttles. So Amazon chose option 3, which is a hybrid approach. And if I were the decision maker and I am making on behalf of Amazon, I most likely will do option 3 as well, because there's no way I would do option 2. Like, first, the government is giving me incentive to go back to the office by giving me tax incentives so that it can stimulate the local economy near the corporate office. Second, I have so much rent that I have to pay. There's no way I'm gonna sell those, right? And third, that I believe, for better or for worse, that people coming back to the office is going to lead to better collaboration and so on. Option 2 is literally just out of the equation. So between option 1 and option 3, option 1 is everyone comes back to the office. And I think that's where they are not sure. And the right thing is to everyone come back to the office. But if they were to do that, then a lot of people might just rage quit. So I believe option 3 is just a stepping stone towards option 1. So they choose option 3. And so because of that, the observable fact is some people feel that the shuttles are wasted. Well, it is what it is. There's no way you can rent a shuttle, which is a fixed cost that only operates, 3 times a week. So by definition, if you choose option 3, some shuttles are gonna go wasted. But there are lots of benefits with that one single con. The benefits are there is collaboration. It is towards the ultimate goal of moving everyone back to the office. And then the other pro is that does lead to better collaboration and better productivity. And just people don't have a way to slack off. So when you do all the math, the benefits definitely outweigh the cons. And that's not to say every decision is always right. It could be wrong. And in fact, the option 3, in my opinion, for Amazon is not the right long-term equilibrium decision. The long-term is option 1, is everyone needs to return to the office. Whereas for our company, we will choose option 2 because we're small. We started as a remote company. And for the next many, many years, we'll probably still be a remote company because we can make it work. But just because someone complained about the shuttle being empty and that's a irony that Amazon that claiming to be frugal is wasting money on this not fully maximized and utilized shuttle doesn't mean the decision is not correct. Now, why is this that important? I think the first thing I want to say that why it's important is, if you're the person experiencing the negative end of a stick, don't assume the decision maker is stupid. They're not. Sometimes decisions are outside of their control. These are the easy examples. Let's take the hard example, like interest rates. Like Jerome Powell has a very, very difficult decision to make about increasing the interest rate, lowering the interest rate, and staying put. Those are the only 3 choices that he can make. Again, decision maker cannot flip-flop. You have one of 3 choices, and that can lead to all kinds of implications. So 1 is empathize with the decision maker. They only have one of 3 choices. And second, just because you're seeing a tidbit of the negative consequences doesn't mean that there are no positive consequences. And number 3 is by having that sense of the people that are making decisions are no smarter than you, no worse than you, and they're doing the best they can, but their perspective is looking at the system as a whole, can help most people avoid this victim's mentality. And that's really important. That is maybe my takeaway. It makes you happier. It makes you more productive. It makes you empathize a bit more. And it helps you see that people are doing the best they can. And with everything, you just have to take the good with the bad and the bad with the good. And it's an imperfect system. And in an imperfect system, there's only so much people can do. And they are doing it with the perspective of the entire system in mind. And they do have to sacrifice. They know certain bad mechanisms will happen. And yes, they will still make that decision. Let's take one last example. In a company, you have a fixed amount of money. And you have 2 choices. One is you give that amount of money to your most important folks, such as your engineers. And that's option 1. Option 2 is that fixed amount of money, you give most of the money to the people that don't get paid very much in the first place. If you're running a big company, those will be your delivery drivers. Those will be folks that are making barely above minimum wage. Fixed amount of money, what would you do? Well, we have a classic example in the world where apparently in China, Jingdong chose the path of giving most of the money to the low-paying employees first and not paying that additional to the engineers. Whereas Alibaba give all the money to their engineers and keeping the lowest folks earning still just barely above minimum wage. For better or for worse, both of them have their cons and both of them have their pros. So in a constrained, complex system, you only have one of 2 choices to make. And the wisdom comes down to how would you make the decision and how do you think about the decision? And someone asked me that question and my answer is like, it's very easy. I will choose the same way that Jingdong makes. Because if I were a software engineer and I'm getting paid, say, $150,000 a year, if you give me like $10,000 more, I'll just be like, you are stingy as F. Like that doesn't make any difference in my life. I would rather get more recognition. I want to learn more about engineering. I also want more equity. But then if you give that same $10,000 to one of the lower earners that's making $50,000 and you split it, you give them say $5,000. That's huge to them. So what Jingdong did was to provide, I think, insurance or health insurance to all their delivery drivers. And fast forward many years later, Jingdong is a much more successful company. Now, some decision makers make that because they want to optimize for the outcome. But I do think that some decision makers just do it based on putting themselves in people's shoes. And it becomes a very human decision making. It's not really looking at the numbers, but looking at what's intrinsically correct. What would I feel if I were in that position? That is a fascinating topic for me. So what have I learned this week? I've learned that it's best to withhold your judgment on the decisions just because you experience a negative consequence of a particular mechanism. And the second is sometimes the best decisions are not based on data, but based on how would you feel if you were the experiencer of those consequences, and which one will make a better impact in your life. And then work backwards of making a very human decision that's also intrinsically good for the business. So I like to think a lot of things now in my life through the lens of, is this just a mechanism, i.e. that it's a negative side effect of a great decision, and that decision has a lot of pros that which I don't see, or that is intrinsically bad. And that even though there are lots of positive mechanisms, the decision is not beneficial to what really matters. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this, you can subscribe to this channel or thumbs up on this one. Thank you for watching. Bye.